Welcome to episode 53 of the LibertyDad podcast, where we prepare for tomorrow's political conversation by how we engage today. If you're new to the show, liberty represents the message of all your freedom all the time, and Dad represents the delivery. Recognizing tomorrow's conversation with my son is determined by how I engage with him today, and then applying that to those around me. I'm your host, DL, and this episode is to associate with bigots or not, where I'll discuss whether disassociating with bigots is in the best interest of the Libertarian Party or anyone for that matter. With that said, let's dive right in. Hey everyone. I've been seeing a lot of calls regarding how people should respond to bigots and bigotry in the Libertarian Party. Almost always, it's something along the lines of disassociating with them and encouraging others to do likewise. Just over a month ago, I engaged in my first structured debate. That is, it was more than just an exchange with somebody online or at my house over some drinks. And the proposition was the Libertarian Party is best served by disassociating from bigots. Another Libertarian Party member, Archie Flower, from the chair of the Vermont Libertarian Party, took the affirmative and I took the negative. It was an interesting experience because the format was such that we each had a 10-minute opening and then a 10-minute response, followed by 3 questions each where the other person had 3 minutes to respond, and then questions from viewers. In this episode, I'd like to expand a little bit on my thoughts since I have more flexibility now than in a debate forum. Let's start with getting a definition, since that will greatly assist in understanding what I mean when I use certain words, or just the word bigotry in this particular case. Merriam-Webster defines a bigot as a person who is obstinately or intolerantly devoted to his or her own opinions and prejudices. Oxford Dictionary defines it as, quote, a person who has very strong, unreasonable beliefs or opinions about race, religion, or politics, and who will not listen to or accept the opinions of anyone who disagrees. And the Cambridge Dictionary defines it as a person who has a strong, unreasonable belief and who does not like other people who have different beliefs or a different way of life. By any of these 3 definitions, I would argue that any libertarian could easily point to numerous other libertarians who fit these definitions. If you're watching and you're somebody who is not a libertarian, chances are, whatever circles you are in, you can find other people who happen to fit these definitions. And in all of these circles, we may find people who share some of the same beliefs that we do that fit these definitions. The core of all 3 definitions is that someone has strong opinions and is unwilling to budge. American psychologist Gordon Allport articulated an idea called the contact hypothesis in his 1954 book, The Nature of Prejudice. This theory holds prejudice and conflict within various groups is greatly reduced between minority and majority group members when members share 4 conditions: equal status, common goals, cooperative work, and institutional support. He makes an interesting point about prejudice when exploring how best to define it, specifically distinguishing prejudice from prejudgment, judging based on limited information, which we all do. Here's what he says, quote, not every overblown generalization is a prejudice. Some are simply misconceptions. Prejudgments become prejudices only if they are not reversible when exposed to new knowledge, end quote. We might draw from that definition to succinctly say a bigot is someone with strong prejudices on public topics such as race, religion, or politics. This keeps the definition somewhat broad while acknowledging 2 core elements: strong opinions about a topic and unwillingness to hear to the contrary. Including the element of public topics is useful since that's where we most often observe bigotry in action. We think about that for a moment. What you have is we say that someone is a bigot who happens to have strong views, maybe on different races, but we wouldn't necessarily say that to someone who has strong views on what makes a better vehicle or who makes a better vehicle, say Ford or Chevy. And that is exactly what I mean when I say that any libertarian or person can point to another person who fits that definition and sometimes shares our own views, making us equally guilty along the way. If we want to limit this definition to say matters of race or other things that we don't like, then a different definition and rationale for that definition is necessary. So far, I've yet to come across one. A good working definition or not, there is still the matter of freedom of association. Freedom of association is fundamental to a free society, and it's an idea that libertarians rightfully hold very tightly. With the freedom to associate comes the freedom to disassociate. I do not argue whether it's within the right of the body as a whole or individual members to do either. My argument is that disassociating on the basis of obstinate belief does not best serve the party. And I support that argument by saying neither observation nor data support disassociation on that basis. Let's start by reviewing some observations. Dia Khan, a Muslim activist of Middle Eastern descent, produced a 2017 documentary titled White Right Meeting the Enemy. Dia interviews Ken Parker, a longtime member of the White Power movement and once Grand Dragon of the KKK. Interestingly, Ken Parker is from here in Jacksonville. Here's a brief clip from the film between her and Ken Parker. As a courtesy, and because I generally avoid profanity on the show, this clip contains highly offensive language. Anyone with children present may wish to take whatever measure you believe is appropriate. Let's take a listen.
I decided to share some of my own experiences with him, so I show him the interview I gave to the BBC.
What does it mean to build a society that includes all of us, where it means looking like me and looking like you?
And I read him some of the racist emails I got as a result.
Save a life and bin that knife into her chest. This sour cunt should be gassed. Fuck off, bitch. Nazi Germany did it.
When I'm not here and you speak to your friends about me, would you use some of these words about me?
No.
Would you call me a sand nigger?
Maybe if I'm drunk.
And if I told you that you calling me those words hurts my heart?
I'll do my very best not to use them.
Yeah?
Yes.
Because?
Because I respect you and I don't want to hurt your feelings.
Why are you nice to me?
You've been completely respectful to me. I actually consider you to be a friend. My opinion about Muslims since I've been interacting with you has gone up significantly. Besides asking me questions that, kind of got under my skin a little bit. Don't do the flyers, blah, blah, blah. Don't throw them out in a Jew neighborhood. Don't use the Jew flyers with the swastika. You're gonna hurt people's feelings. It comes down to when my girlfriend was in the hospital for a month and the only one that called to see how she was doing was a woman from the mosque. I was like, holy shit, I can't believe that. Here these people that I fucking hate are checking up on her.
About a year later, the local news reported this follow-up.
So how did he make such a drastic change?
A female Muslim reporter from the UK, she filmed a documentary with me. It was the first time in my life I'd ever really interacted with a Muslim.
That was step one for Parker. Step two was this man, a pastor. He says never gave up on him or his fiancée.
I was hanging out down by the pool, and there's a black pastor. He invited us to go to church with him, so he showed us nothing but love.
Step three was being welcomed into these doors with open arms. Do you feel any of that anger you felt the last time you were here?
No, not at all. Not at all. It's just not fun. Some people might have fun. You might convince yourself it's fun for a little while, but it just takes too much time and energy to live like that.
Members of this congregation tell me they've seen Ken Parker here every Sunday since a couple weeks before Easter. They said on Easter Sunday he sat in the front row. They said he's been just as involved as anyone else, singing along and appearing to be very happy that he's here. Reporting on the South Side, Shelby Danielson, First Coast News, on your side.
Now hold on to that thought for a moment, and I want you to consider the experience of Daryl Davis, an R&B and blues musician who had struggled with why someone might hate him who didn't even know him. Mr. Davis set up a meeting with Roger Kelly, the imperial wizard of the KKK in Maryland. The meeting was tense, but it led to many more meetings and even a friendship. It ultimately led Roger Kelly leaving the KKK along with many others as Davis continued associating with its members. We might consider my own experience in 8th grade. Egos clashed between myself and a peer. We decided to settle it the old-fashioned way, at a local park after school. And you know what? I lost spectacularly. After repeated kicks to the side of my chest, the other student gave one final kick while reminding me of the insult that I used that got me in that position. Word got out quickly to the teachers at the Catholic school that we both attended. And despite the fight not being on school grounds, they decided to take action. Our science teacher pulled us both together and indicated that we now had a project to work on. And this project would be a significant portion of our grade and could even affect whether or not we passed that class and moved on to the next grade. Through that project, we became friends, hanging out almost every day. We even started attending church together. Unless you knew, you would have never guessed that he once gave me a pretty brutal beating. But maybe Dia and Daryl are anomalies, people with some unique personality that allowed them to accomplish what most of us cannot. Maybe my experience was simply a fortunate outcome that we cannot come to expect. Maybe I'm misrepresenting their stories. Let's take a listen to Dia herself speaking to Russell Brand on his podcast episode, How Love Will Defeat Hate. Just before this clip that I'm about to play, she's describing her experience with Ken Parker and how he was so uncomfortable when she was reading the emails that she had received, all the hate emails. Here's that clip.
That sounds really counterintuitive, right? Right, for a person like me to sit there and, somebody who considers me to be a shit skin and a degenerate and all
Did
kinds
he say
of
stuff like that during the conversation?
No, because he wasn't able to. So what I did do is that I told him all those things. I described myself in those terms because that's how I'd been described by people in the past and also in the threats that I'd received. So I kept using these words about myself just to his face. We sat this far apart from each other. And every time I would use a word like that about myself, he would just squirm and be really uncomfortable. And then I just started laughing and going, look, I mean, obviously this isn't the first time that you're hearing words like this. I'm assuming you use words like this. And if you don't, then people around you certainly do. So why are you so uncomfortable? And he just couldn't answer, but he was really uncomfortable. And I said, do you not want me to use language like that? And he's like, no, I don't. And so, so part of that question that I had, is it possible to hate in up close and personal? And face to face, obviously it wasn't possible for him. It is possible for many other people, but it wasn't possible for him.
What does that make you think?
That something else is possible. That also my judgments against people like him, my prejudices, and my kind of very flat caricature that I carry in my mind and my heart about men like that is also incorrect. So it says something about me as well.
Okay, now I want to play this clip of Daryl's final words during a TED Talk that he gave on his experience. Let's take a listen.
Sitting down and talking, not necessarily agreeing, but respecting each other to air their points of view. Because of that respect and my willingness to listen and his willingness to listen to me, he ended up leaving the Klan, and there's his robe right there. I am a musician, not a psychologist or sociologist. If I can do that, anybody in here can do that. Take the time to sit down and talk with your adversaries. You will learn something, and they will learn something from you.
Consider this. Daryl isn't a sociologist, a psychologist, or anyone with formal training to reform anyone. He was simply somebody that wanted to know more about people who hated him. In the process, he claims around 200 people have left the Klan. Dia's comment reinforces my earlier definition of bigotry when she acknowledges that even though Ken was the racist, she had her own prejudices about him, who he was and what motivated him, and so on. Now, that we've explored this observation, I don't want to dive too deep in it, but I think we've explored it sufficiently. Let's talk about what the research has to say. Having read a little bit about, or quite a bit, about Gordon Allport's study of discrimination and prejudice, I decided to purchase the book and give it a read. From the literature that I've read, it would seem that the book is still pretty relevant. Many studies since then have confirmed this theory, this contact theory, in various group settings. In a 2006 paper, social psychologists Linda Trop and Thomas Pettigrew conducted a meta-analysis of 515 such studies, concluding the consistency of contact does reduce prejudice. That analysis also produced 3 interesting caveats. Number 1 was that the results did not reflect self-selection. That is, contact was beneficial regardless whether each of the 2 sides sought the other one out. Number 2, contact also reduces prejudice with other minority groups. That is, when I'm working with one particular minority group, the prejudices that lower between them and I also have the effect of lowering prejudices between me and other groups, and then the group that I'm working with and other groups as well. In other words, it kind of has this rippling effect. And then number 3, while the 4 conditions that I mentioned earlier do produce better results together, prejudice was reduced even when some of the conditions were unmet. Psychologist John DeVito suggests that contact changes how we categorize others through decategorization. This is a shifting of our view to see others as individuals rather than a member of the group. And then there's another process that comes along. It's called recategorization. This places that same person, now that we've kind of extracted them and made them an individual, this places them in a larger group with whom we are not in conflict with. Stories like Dia Khan, Daryl Davis, and even my own illustrate these categorization changes. Think about that. With my friend, he was some other group. I don't remember now, it's been quite a few years, but through the process of interacting with him, we became friends. So I started to see him as an individual. Once I saw him as an individual, then I started to place him in some other category, a group of people basically that I am no longer in, or I'm not necessarily no longer, but that I'm not in conflict with. The same goes with Dia and Ken Parker. Originally, Ken Parker saw Dia just basically as a Muslim, and that's a group that he had conflict with, even though he had never met a group. But then, through interaction, and they had spent many hours together, film recording and talking to him, through that process, he started to see her as an individual. And when he saw her as an individual, and then when she reciprocated through kindness, through contacting him and hearing him and listening to him, through those things, he eventually moved her into some category, some group that he was no longer, or again, that he was not in conflict with. And she became somebody that he actually decided that, hey, you're a friend of mine. But let's get to the real question here. Where does the Libertarian Party fit in all of this? After all, isn't the Libertarian Party just a political organization who has a purpose of influencing legislation and getting members elected to various local, state, and national government positions? I mean, after all, as one person told me, it's not rehab for terrible people. And furthermore, another person said that associating with bigots has the effect of sending a clear signal to the targets of their bigotry. I happen to disagree with those. But the Libertarian Party and the movement of libertarians those who may or may not participate in the party is steeped in the concept of the individual. Self-ownership was one of the foundational principles that I spoke about in a prior episode, and I said that it was necessary to being a libertarian. In fact, the word individual is used 40 times in our party platform. But beyond just word counts, the second sentence in our own platform says this: we believe that respect for individual rights is the essential precondition for a free and prosperous world, that force and fraud must be banished from human relationships, and that only through freedom can peace and prosperity be realized. You know, during a podcast episode, and our LNC chair, not my podcast, another podcast, our LNC chair made the point that if you're a member of the Libertarian Party, then you have as much say as any other members in the direction that the party goes. He further pointed out that this greatly distinguishes us from the Republican and the Democratic parties. Over and over, our party demonstrates its dedication to the individual. The Libertarian Party is the best shot we have to see a world set free in our lifetime. Our attention and dedication to the individual is unmatched by any other. We operate on the belief that society does not require a government to manage all of the affairs of its citizens, and that when left to be free, truly free, people are incentivized to do the right thing, well more than they are not. I believe our party is not just a body with a political mission. We are a body of people who believe our shared ideas about the individual are fundamentally and morally superior than any alternative. Therefore, I argue that when observation and research show association and not disassociation reduces bigotry and prejudice from voluntary associations, that it is us and only us who are in the best position to show the world the value that comes from voluntary associations. No group of people, no political party extols the value of voluntary associations more than libertarians. And while yes, disassociation is the other side of that magnificent coin, we would do well to remember that those who are the most hostile and hateful among us already show us the nasty results of disassociation. Ken Parker had never met a Muslim woman. When he did, Dia's patience and willingness to learn about him and her own self resulted in Ken learning to appreciate the value of associating with people that he once hated. Finally, let me briefly mention how members can feel safe when peers have relationships with bigots or are in proximity to bigots, however it's defined. The answer is in establishing boundaries. For instance, when you come to my home, you may enter with the foulest of ideas. What you may not do is insult, threaten, intimidate, or speak foul to any person in my home. Those who do are shown the door. If and when you have come to your senses and you demonstrate that you are able to interact cordially and productively, the door will once again be open. The Libertarian Party is not best served by members disassociating based on obstinate beliefs, but actual behavior. And I would extend that to anyone of any party and any group. That doesn't mean that we have to tolerate bad behavior. We can say that this behavior is unwelcome. We can give people boundaries and say, look, you may be coming here with bad ideas. You might even hate some of us. But here are the boundaries. And if you can respect them, then we can move forward from there. It works. The science is there. The observation is there. The Libertarian Party and the world around us is best served when we lead and demonstrate to the world that when used wisely, as observation and research tells us, freedom of association and respect for the individual are powerful enough to change people and lead to a world set free. I hope you have enjoyed this episode, even been challenged by it. It's a tough topic. I've met and talked with so many people who don't want to have anything to do with who they believe are bigots. But I think that it's wise if we take a lesson from Dia Khan, who met with them, and then who later recounted her experience and said that she learned that she had her own prejudices. I think it's a good opportunity to really think about the prejudices that we hold. What prejudices are we carrying that may be contributing to this conflict when, if we remove those, may provide an opportunity for somebody else to remove theirs. This is exactly how Dia had the impact on Ken Parker. This is exactly how Daryl Davis had the impact on all the members of the KKK that he was able to talk to and not really seek to convince them anything, just talk to them and result in them leaving the KKK. The reality is, once we start getting to know people better, once we know what makes them tick, once we know what feelings they have, what things that they believe and don't believe, not the assumptions that we make, the things that we actually learn from interacting, magnificent things happen. I look forward to meeting anybody that's watching this, having conversation. Leave me some comments if you will. Send me some hate mail. I get it. It's a tough conversation. But for now, let's have that bill review.
But I know I'll be a law someday, at least I hope and pray that I will. But today I am still just a bill.
The goal of the bill review is to promote the idea that everyday Americans can and should take the time to read any legislation, order, or mandate. Since I'm not a lawyer, this isn't a legal interpretation, and I may be wrong. Bills range from a page or two up to many thousands of pages long. And since they can be rather dry, this segment is short and only meant to show you just how much you can learn in only a few minutes. In this episode, I review Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' recent executive order 21-81 titled Prohibiting COVID-19 Vaccine Passports. If you're not familiar with a vaccine passport, it's an extension of the standard manner of documenting vaccines, but extended to more everyday things. The state of New York, for example, is currently working on something called Excelsior Pass, which will allow certain businesses who choose to participate to reopen sooner than later. The idea is pretty simple. Either you have proof of a vaccination or proof of a negative COVID-19 test, and that information can be carried on a piece of paper or via your cell phone. Participating businesses can then verify you are either vaccinated or have tested negative, and then you may enter the premises. Currently, vaccine passports are being presented more for larger venues, such as sports coliseums, concert halls, and other very public businesses. This executive order is only 3 pages, and it's rather simple. It begins with a number of whereas statements. If you remember, in a previous episode, I pointed out that the whereas clause is basically a because statement. Because of this, because of that, and so on and so forth. And then it goes into the order. So let's take a quick look at some of these whereas clauses in this executive order. First one. Whereas on March 9, 2020, I issued Executive Order 20-52, subsequently extended, declaring a state of emergency for the entire state of Florida as a result of COVID-19. Number 2, whereas many Floridians have not yet had the opportunity to obtain a COVID-19 vaccination, some have infection-acquired immunity, and others may be unable to obtain a COVID-19 vaccination due to health, religious, or other reasons. Next one, whereas Florida seeks to ensure that every Floridian who desires a COVID-19 vaccine can obtain one, but such vaccines will not be mandated. Whereas no COVID-19 vaccine is required by law. Next one. Whereas individual COVID-19 vaccination records are private health information which should not be shared by mandate. Next one. Whereas so-called COVID-19 vaccine passports reduce individual freedom and will harm patient privacy. Whereas requiring so-called COVID-19 vaccine passports for taking part in everyday life, such as attending a sporting event, patronizing a restaurant, or going to a movie theater, would create two classes of citizens based on vaccination. And then finally, whereas it is necessary to protect the fundamental rights and privacies of Floridians and the free flow of commerce within the state. Whew, that was a lot. I'm not going to read the rest because it's relatively simple, and I want to focus more on the whereas clauses. The rest of the executive order basically bans any government agency from issuing any documentation related to someone's vaccination status. It prohibits businesses from requiring it, requires various state agencies to enforce it, but it does let businesses implement screening protocols, such as temperature checks and so forth. The question is often, shouldn't businesses be able to do business with whom they wish, on whatever grounds they wish? And my answer to that would be a resounding yes. Vaccine passports are a bit of an interesting thing in that they are coming with a lot of government support and influence. As I mentioned, the state of New York is rolling out Excelsior Pass, which will be used to permit participating businesses to reopen sooner than later. There are two arguments here. One, that any business who chooses to reopen is doing so voluntarily. Or, by restricting businesses from reopening, it's akin to twisting their arm and asking them to either give in or see how long they're willing to hold out. I'm in the latter group. Now let's go to those whereas clauses. The first whereas clause mentions Executive Order 20-52, which declares a state of emergency for the state of Florida. According to Florida statute, certain powers are granted, but only after issuing a state of emergency. Think of it as one executive order declaring there is a problem and subsequent executive orders building off that problem by imposing some sort of action. I see this as generally a good thing if we're going to have executive orders and such declarations, because it allows the citizens to judge whether or not they believe that their governing members have made good decisions. Imagine this. In Florida, imagine a hurricane hits. It's not very imaginative. The governor may issue a state of emergency in one executive order and then impose restrictions on the public from, say, entering certain areas in another. The second whereas that I find really interesting is because it provides for 3 conditions where someone might not be vaccinated. Let me read that portion again. Whereas many Floridians have not yet had the opportunity to obtain a COVID-19 vaccination, some have infection-acquired immunity, and others may have been unable to obtain a COVID-19 vaccination due to health, religious, or other reasons. Those 3 conditions are people who want a vaccine but are unable, those who have acquired immunity from prior infection, and those unable because of health, religious, or other reasons. Now, what's interesting is the people that are not represented here are people who might simply prefer not to have the vaccine. Say maybe someone who believes that COVID-19 is a hoax, or maybe that they believe it's a really bad flu, or maybe someone who is just ambivalent, as many people are with the flu. Much of the rest of the whereas clauses I read were related to mandating things in some manner. Those I generally agree with. I do not believe it is the proper authority for the state to mandate any medical treatment. And let's be clear, a vaccine for COVID is first and foremost medical treatment to you, though it comes with some level of benefit for others. It's his last 2 that give me a little small pause. He mentions that a vaccine passport would create 2 classes of citizens based on vaccination, and that it is necessary to protect the free flow of commerce within the state. What it doesn't specify is whether or not the first is a result of the free market requiring it, the government, or both. I would argue that when the government requires it, that basically means both. However, if, and it's a big if the requirement were solely coming from businesses, no government involvement, then I would disagree with this portion, which would also mean that I would disagree with the need to protect the free flow of commerce. It would be instead interfering with it. Overall, I'm comfortable with this executive order, but I'm not excited. I wish it would clarify that these measures only reflect vaccine passports where government is making even the slightest requirement or imposition. But most importantly, many people may not realize this executive order is not permanent. In the last section, it says this: "This order is effective immediately and shall remain in effect for the duration of Executive Order 20-52 as extended." The moment that executive order comes to its end and that the state of emergency regarding COVID-19 is no longer in effect, this executive order ends. That may be a good thing, and it may not. It might catch people by surprise if sometime in the future it is no longer in effect and vaccine passports do become a requirement. That's all for this episode. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to hit that subscribe button. And to catch Liberty Dad episodes when they air, head over to facebook.com/Free Speech Media Network, where the weekly episode of Just Me airs Monday night at 10 p.m. Or join Josh Fields from the Libertarian Apothecary and me on Friday night at 11 p.m. for a discussion-style episode of the same topic. And while you're there, be sure to check out some of the other great free speech media shows. Lastly, remember this: if you're a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. Have a great week. Catch you next time, and I'm out.